I'm an emergency room physician at Riverside General Hospital in Burlington, Vermont, or at least I was until I submitted my resignation 4 weeks ago. You can call me Dr. Alexander Brennan if you want, though most people in the ER just called me Dr. Alex. During my 19 years there, I've seen everything you can imagine in emergency medicine: farm accidents, ski injuries, hypothermia cases, cardiac arrests, and every kind of trauma the human body can endure in New England's unforgiving climate. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that terrified me so completely. It made me question not just everything I thought I knew about medicine, but about reality itself, and ultimately led me to leave emergency medicine entirely. This is a story that will challenge everything you believe about identity, about medical records, about the very fabric of how our documented society functions. What I witnessed over the course of 10 harrowing days will make you wonder, is it possible for someone to exist in our world without leaving any trace anywhere? And if so, what does that mean about the nature of existence itself? Riverside General is the primary trauma center serving central and northern Vermont, as well as portions of New Hampshire and upstate New York. It's a 400-bed facility that handles everything from routine emergencies to complex surgical cases, serving a population of nearly 300,000 people across a largely rural area where the nearest major hospital can be hours away by ambulance. During my 19 years there, I treated over 60,000 patients. I've worked through blizzards that shut down entire highways, floods that displaced thousands, and the occasional mass casualty event that tests every resource we have. I specialized in emergency trauma and critical care, which means I was often the first, and sometimes only, doctor standing between a patient and death. I've seen cases that would make most people sick to their stomachs. I've held the hands of dying children, delivered babies in our emergency bay when there wasn't time to reach obstetrics, and made split-second decisions that determined whether families went home whole or broken. I thought I had developed the kind of clinical detachment that allows emergency physicians to function in chaos while maintaining their sanity. I was wrong about that, just like I was wrong about so many other things I thought I understood about medicine and reality. The case I'm about to tell you about began during one of the worst winter storms Vermont had seen in decades. It was February 14th, 2024, Valentine's Day, which we always dreaded in the ER because it brought its own special brand of domestic disputes and romantic disasters. But this Valentine's Day was different because Mother Nature decided to dump 2 feet of snow on us in the span of 8 hours, accompanied by winds that knocked out power to half the state. By 10:30 p.m., our emergency department was operating on backup generators. Our parking lot was impassable, except for emergency vehicles, and we had patients stacked up in hallways because the storm had made normal transfers to other facilities impossible. It was exactly the kind of night that tests everything: your training, your equipment, your staff, and your ability to make life and death decisions under impossible circumstances. I had just finished treating a construction worker who had fallen off an icy roof when our head nurse, Catherine Walsh, a 25-year veteran who had seen everything Vermont winters could throw at us, approached me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Catherine was legendary for her calm under pressure. I had watched her coordinate care during a school bus accident that brought in 18 injured children, and she never even raised her voice. But on this night, she looked genuinely shaken. "Dr. Brennan," she said, pulling me aside near the medication lockup where we couldn't be overheard. "We have a situation in Trauma Room 7 that I can't explain." "What kind of situation?" I asked, assuming it was a staffing issue or equipment failure related to the storm. "The paramedics just brought in a woman who was found unconscious in Ethan Allen Park during the blizzard, but Alex," she paused, using my first name, which she only did when something was seriously wrong. "There's something very strange about this case." I followed Catherine to Trauma Room 7, where I found paramedics Jake Morrison and Linda Fletcher, both longtime colleagues I trusted implicitly, standing beside a gurney with bewildered expressions. The patient was a woman who appeared to be in her mid-30s, with auburn hair and pale skin. She was wearing what looked like an expensive burgundy wool coat, black leather boots, and underneath, a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people made in a week. But here's what made no sense. She was completely dry. "Jake," I said, pulling on my examination gloves, "walk me through how you found her." Jake Morrison was a 15-year veteran paramedic who had worked in Chicago before moving to Vermont. He had seen everything, and I had never known him to embellish a story or get rattled by unusual circumstances. But as he began describing the call, I could hear uncertainty in his voice. We got the call at 9:47 p.m. from a snowplow operator working Ethan Allen Parkway, he began. "Driver said he spotted someone lying in the snow about 50 yards off the main path, near the big oak tree by the lake. When we arrived, we found her lying on her back, arms at her sides, like she had just laid down to take a nap." "In the middle of a blizzard?" I asked. "That's just it, Doc. She wasn't covered in snow. The storm had been going strong for 6 hours by then. Everything in that park was buried under at least 18 inches of fresh powder, but she was lying on top of the snow, completely clean and dry, like she had been placed there minutes before we arrived." Linda Fletcher, Jake's partner, nodded in agreement. "Alex, I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Her core body temperature should have been dangerously low. She should have been hypothermic, frostbitten, showing signs of exposure. Instead, her temp was 98.4 degrees, perfectly normal. Her clothes weren't even damp." I began my initial examination while they continued their report. Blood pressure 118/76, heart rate 64 beats per minute, respiratory rate 16 breaths per minute, oxygen saturation 99%. For someone who had allegedly been unconscious in sub-zero temperatures during a blizzard, her vital signs were impossibly stable. "Any identification?" I asked Catherine, who was setting up monitoring equipment. "That's another problem," she replied grimly. "No purse, no wallet, no phone, no jewelry, except for this." She held up a simple silver chain with what appeared to be an antique locket. "But here's the strange part. The locket won't open. There's no clasp, no hinge, nothing. It's like it's been sealed shut." I spent the next hour conducting the most thorough examination of my career, because nothing about this woman made medical sense. Her neurological responses were completely normal for someone in natural sleep, not the kind of unconsciousness you'd expect from hypothermia, drug overdose, or head trauma. Her pupils were reactive, her reflexes were appropriate, and her muscle tone was normal. But the more I examined her, the more questions arose. Her skin was perfect, no scars, no blemishes, no signs of sun damage or aging. Her hands were soft, with perfectly manicured nails that showed no signs of work or wear. Her teeth were straight and white, clearly the result of expensive dental work, but there were no fillings, no crowns, no evidence of any dental procedures whatsoever. Dr. Miranda Lawson, our staff radiologist, came down personally to review her CT and MRI scans, something she rarely did, unless a case was particularly unusual or complex. After spending 20 minutes studying the images, she pulled me into the hallway with a puzzled expression. "Alex, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer," she said. "How old would you estimate this patient to be?" Based on physical appearance, I'd say mid-30s, maybe 35 to 38. Miranda nodded slowly. "That's what I thought too. But Alex, look at these scans." She pulled up the images on her tablet. Her bone density, her brain structure, her organ development, everything suggests someone in their early 20s. But that's not the strangest part. "What do you mean?" "I mean her bones show no signs of wear, no evidence of previous breaks or injuries, no degenerative changes that you'd expect to see in someone who has lived an active life for 30 plus years. It's like she's medically 22 years old, but physically appears much older." While I was dealing with the medical mysteries, Catherine was encountering problems with our patient intake system that she described as absolutely unprecedented in her quarter-century of hospital administration. "I've tried everything," she told me during a brief break from patient care. "Facial recognition through our database, fingerprint matching, dental record searches, everything. But Alex, it's not just that we can't find her in our system. We can't find her in any system. What do you mean, any system? I mean, I've contacted the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, the Social Security Administration, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Persons, even Interpol, through our federal liaison contacts. This woman does not exist in any database, anywhere. This was highly unusual, but I initially assumed there was a logical explanation. Perhaps she was undocumented, or had been living off the grid, or was the victim of identity theft. But Catherine's next revelation chilled me to the bone. I also ran the standard checks for Jane Doe cases, contacted local police about missing persons reports, reached out to the FBI's unidentified persons database, checked with homeless shelters and women's shelters throughout New England. Nothing. But here's what really bothers me. I had Detective Sarah Martinez from Burlington PD come in to take her fingerprints for the state database. And Catherine's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Alex, her fingerprints don't match any known patterns. I don't mean they're not in the system. I mean the ridge patterns don't conform to any of the standard classifications that fingerprint experts use. It's like she has fingerprints that shouldn't exist. Determined to find some clue about our mysterious patient's identity, I decided to examine her clothing more carefully. What I discovered only deepened the mystery. Her burgundy wool coat carried no label, no manufacturer's tag, no care instructions, nothing that would indicate where it had been made or purchased. The fabric felt expensive, luxurious, but when I examined it under magnification, the weave pattern was unlike anything I had seen before. It appeared to be hand-woven, but with a precision and consistency that would be impossible to achieve manually. Her leather boots were even more puzzling. They were clearly expensive, with a style that seemed both timeless and somehow unfamiliar. But like the coat, they bore no manufacturer's marks, no size indicators, no country of origin stamps that are required by law on imported leather goods. The leather itself was impossibly soft and showed no signs of wear, despite being what appeared to be everyday footwear. The cashmere sweater was perhaps the strangest item of all. The fiber was incredibly fine, softer than any cashmere I had ever felt. But when Dr. Jennifer Chang, our textile-conscious pathologist, examined a small fiber under microscopic analysis, she discovered something that should have been impossible. Alex, she said, calling me down to the lab at 2 a.m., you need to see this. The fiber from her sweater, it's not cashmere. In fact, it's not from any animal I can identify. The cellular structure is unlike anything in our reference database. It's organic, definitely from a living creature, but not from any species that exists in our taxonomic classifications. Our patient's blood work revealed the most disturbing mysteries of all. Dr. Robert Kim, our chief of pathology, called me to the lab personally after spending 3 hours running and rerunning tests on her samples. Alex, in 30 years of laboratory medicine, I have never encountered anything like this. He began his computer screen. O negative, with cell count, red cell count, platelet levels, all within normal ranges. But when we dig deeper, nothing makes sense. What do you mean? I mean her blood contains cellular structures that shouldn't exist. Her red blood cells are carrying oxygen at efficiency levels that are theoretically impossible. Her immune system markers suggest she has antibodies for diseases that haven't existed for centuries, while simultaneously showing no exposure to common modern pathogens like the flu, common cold viruses, or even childhood diseases like chickenpox. Dr. Kim pulled up another screen. But here's the most disturbing part. We routinely test for drug metabolites, alcohol, toxins, standard and emergency room protocol. Her blood is completely clean, which isn't unusual. What is unusual is that her blood shows no trace of any foreign substances ever. No caffeine, no preservatives from processed foods, no trace minerals from tap water, no environmental pollutants. It's like she's never eaten food or drank water from our modern world. That's impossible, I said. That's what I thought too. So I ran the tests again, using different equipment, different techniques, same results. Alex, this woman's blood suggests she has been living in a completely isolated environment, free from any contact with modern civilization, for her entire life. But look at her clothes, her dental work, her overall appearance. She's clearly from our world, our time period. Desperate for answers, I contacted Burlington Parks and Recreation to request any available security footage from Ethan Allen Park. What they provided raised even more questions. The park had 3 security cameras covering the main pathways and parking areas. Tom Henderson, the city's IT security specialist, walked me through the footage personally after I explained the unusual circumstances of our case. Here's the interesting thing, Doc, he said, pulling up the recordings on his computer. The storm started around 3 p.m. and by 6 p.m., the park was completely empty. Nobody was crazy enough to be out in that weather. Watch this. The footage showed the park gradually disappearing under heavy snow, with visibility dropping to near zero by 8 p.m. The area where our patient was found was barely visible in the distance, but the camera angle provided a clear view of the general vicinity. Now, here's 9:30 p.m., about 15 minutes before the snowplow driver spotted her. Tom continued. The screen showed nothing but swirling snow and darkness. And here's 9:45 p.m., just a couple minutes before the 911 call. The footage was grainy due to the storm conditions, but in the distance, you could make out a dark shape on the snow where none had been before. It was definitely human-shaped, lying in exactly the position where the paramedics had found our patient. Tom, I said, studying the footage carefully, can you back this up frame by frame? I want to see exactly when she appears. We spent the next hour reviewing the footage in slow motion. What we discovered defied explanation. At 9 hours 43 minutes and 12 seconds p.m., the area was empty, except for falling snow. At 9 hours 43 minutes and 13 seconds p.m., 1 second later, she was there, lying motionless on the snow, exactly as the paramedics had found her. This has to be a technical glitch, I said. Camera malfunction, missing frames, something. Tom shook his head. I thought so too, but look at the timestamp data and the snow patterns. The footage is continuous. No dropped frames, no technical issues. According to this, she literally appeared in that spot between 1 second and the next. Unable to explain what I was seeing, I decided to expand my investigation beyond our immediate case. I began calling other hospitals throughout New England, asking about unusual Jane Doe cases or patients with mysterious backgrounds. What I discovered terrified me. Dr. Rachel Morrison from Maine Medical Center in Portland had encountered a similar case just 6 weeks earlier. A woman found unconscious in Deering Oaks Park during a January ice storm, perfectly dry despite the weather conditions, with no identification and no records in any database. The strangest part, Dr. Morrison told me during our phone conversation, was that she woke up after 3 days, spoke perfect English with no accent, but couldn't remember anything about her life or identity. She stayed for a week while we tried to help her recover her memory. Then one morning, she was just gone. No discharge paperwork, no security footage of her leaving, no trace of where she went. Dr. Stephen Walsh from Massachusetts General had a nearly identical case in December, found unconscious in Boston Common during the blizzard before Christmas. He said, beautiful woman, expensive clothes, no identification, no records anywhere. Same thing, woke up with no memory, stayed a few days, then vanished without explanation. Over the next several hours, I contacted 12 hospitals across New England. 7 of them had encountered similar cases over the past 8 months. All women, all found unconscious in public spaces during severe weather events, all with no identification or records, and all had eventually vanished from their hospitals without explanation. On my second day investigating our mysterious patient, I received a phone call that changed everything. The caller identified himself as Agent David Parker from the Department of Health and Human Services, requesting information about our unidentified patient. Dr. Brennan, he said, I understand you have a Jane Doe case that's proving difficult to identify. I'd like to discuss the case with you in person, if possible. Are you working with local law enforcement? I asked, because we've already provided information to Burlington PD. This is a federal matter, Doctor. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, but I can tell you that your patient may be connected to a matter of national security. Agent Parker arrived at the hospital 2 hours later. He was a tall, serious man in his 40s, wearing a black suit that seemed out of place in our rural Vermont hospital. He was accompanied by a woman he introduced only as Dr. Stevens, who claimed to be a specialist in unusual medical cases. Brennan, Agent Parker began, I need to ask you some specific questions about your patient, and I need you to understand that this conversation is considered classified. Classified? She's a Jane Doe case, not a state secret. That's where you're wrong, Doctor. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. He pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of photographs. Each showed a woman who looked remarkably similar to our patient. Same general age, same build, same auburn hair. These photos were taken at different hospitals across the northeastern United States over the past 2 years. All of these women were found under circumstances identical to your patient. What happened to them? Dr. Stevens spoke for the first time. That's classified, Doctor, but I can tell you that these cases represent a pattern we've been tracking, and your patient is extremely important to our investigation. Investigation into what? I'm afraid I can't share those details. However, I need you to contact me immediately if your patient regains consciousness or if anything unusual occurs. And Doctor, Agent Parker's voice became stern. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that you not discuss this case with anyone outside your immediate medical team. On the morning of February 17th, our mysterious patient began showing the first signs of consciousness. Catherine noticed it first during her morning rounds, slight movements of the patient's fingers, changes in her breathing patterns, and what appeared to be rapid eye movement beneath her closed eyelids. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, our staff neurologist, conducted a comprehensive examination and confirmed that our patient was transitioning from unconsciousness to natural sleep patterns. Her brain activity is increasing, Dr. Hoffman reported. EEG patterns suggest she could regain consciousness within the next 24 to 48 hours. I found myself both hopeful and anxious about this development. On one hand, a conscious patient could potentially provide answers to the mysteries surrounding her identity and circumstances. On the other hand, Agent Parker's warnings about the classified nature of her case made me wonder what we were really dealing with. That afternoon, I was reviewing her latest test results when Catherine approached me with an expression of concern mixed with excitement. Alex, you need to come to room 7 right away, she said urgently. When I arrived, I found our patient's eyes open for the first time. She was staring at the ceiling with an expression of confusion and wonder, as if she was seeing electric lights for the first time in her life. Ma'am, I said gently, approaching her bedside, can you hear me? Do you understand what I'm saying? She turned her head toward me slowly, and I found myself looking into the most unusual eyes I had ever seen, pale green with flecks of gold that seemed to shift and change in the hospital lighting. For a moment, she just stared at me with an expression that seemed both ancient and childlike. Then she spoke, and her voice was like nothing I had ever heard, melodic, with perfect pronunciation, but carrying an accent I couldn't identify. Where am I? She asked. What is this place? I spent the next several hours conducting what would become the most extraordinary patient interview of my career. Our mysterious patient, who we were still calling Jane Doe, was clearly intelligent and articulate, but her responses to basic questions revealed a level of confusion that went far beyond simple amnesia. "What's your name?" I asked, starting with the most fundamental question. She was quiet for a long moment, her unusual eyes studying my face intently. "I remember being called Serafina, but I'm not certain if that was truly my name." "Do you remember where you're from, where you live?" "I remember forests, mountains covered in snow, a place where the air was very cold and very clean." She paused, looking around the hospital room with obvious bewilderment. "But nothing like this. What are these lights? They're so bright and steady." I realized she was referring to our fluorescent lighting, as if she had never seen electric lights before. "Serafina, do you know what year it is?" Her confusion deepened. "Year? I remember seasons, many seasons, but I don't understand what you mean by year." Dr. Hoffman, who had been observing the interview, stepped forward. "Can you tell us the last thing you remember before waking up here?" Serafina closed her eyes, concentrating. "I remember cold, terrible cold, and something was wrong, something that shouldn't have been. I remember falling, but not to the ground, falling through something that felt like water but wasn't water." "Do you remember being in the park? Do you remember lying in the snow?" "Snow?" She looked genuinely puzzled. "I have always lived with snow, but I don't remember lying in it. I remember," she struggled with the words, "I remember feeling like I was between places, like I was caught between one world and another." As our conversation continued, Serafina began sharing details about her life that seemed to come from another time, or perhaps another world entirely. She described living in what sounded like a pre-industrial society, in a place where people heated their homes with wood fires and traveled on foot or by horse. "We lived in the high valleys," she said, her voice taking on a dreamy quality as she remembered. "Our village was small, maybe 40 families. We grew our own food, made our own clothes, took care of each other. The winters were long and harsh, but we knew how to survive them." "What about technology? Cars, televisions, computers?" She looked at me blankly. "I don't understand those words." "Electricity, electric lights, like these." I gestured toward the fluorescent fixtures above us. "I have seen lightning," she said thoughtfully, "but captured light that stays steady and bright like this, no, never." Dr. Hoffman and I exchanged glances. Either Serafina was suffering from an extremely unusual form of psychological trauma that had created elaborate false memories, or she was telling us about a life lived completely outside modern civilization. "Serafina," I said carefully, "can you describe the people in your village, your family?" Her expression became sad. "My mother was a healer. She knew which plants could cure sickness, how to set broken bones, how to help women give birth safely. People came to her from other villages when they needed help." She touched the silver locket at her throat. "She gave me this before the change came." "What change?" "The world became wrong. The seasons stopped following their proper order. The animals began acting strangely. People started disappearing." Her voice became fearful. "And then the cold came. But it wasn't natural cold. It was cold that felt alive, cold that moved and thought and hunted." While I was conducting these interviews, our medical team continued running tests on Serafina, and the results continued to defy explanation. Dr. Kim's latest blood work showed results that should have been medically impossible. "Alex," he said, pulling me aside after Serafina had been conscious for 2 days, "her cellular regeneration rates are unlike anything I've ever documented. Small cuts heal in hours instead of days. Her immune system is fighting off infections that she shouldn't even be able to recognize. And her metabolism," he paused, checking his notes. She's processing nutrients at efficiency levels that are theoretically impossible for human physiology. What are you saying? I'm saying that from a medical standpoint, she's not entirely human as we understand the term. Oh, she's definitely a person, definitely conscious and intelligent, but her biology operates according to rules that don't match anything in our medical textbooks. Dr. Chang had equally disturbing findings from her continued analysis of Serafina's clothing and personal effects. That locket around her neck, the metal isn't silver as we initially thought. It's an alloy I can't identify, composed of elements that don't appear in our periodic table. And it's not just sealed shut. The molecular structure suggests it was formed as a single piece, without any joining or welding process. On February 20th, Agent Parker returned to the hospital, this time accompanied by a larger team of federal agents and what appeared to be military personnel. They arrived unannounced and immediately began setting up equipment in the conference room down the hall from Serafina's room. Dr. Brennan, Agent Parker said, "We need to transfer your patient to a federal facility where she can receive specialized care." What kind of specialized care? She's recovering well, and her vital signs are stable. The kind of care that civilian hospitals aren't equipped to provide. This is not a request, doctor. We have legal authority to take custody of this patient. On what grounds? Dr. Stevens stepped forward. On the grounds that she represents a potential biological hazard that requires federal oversight and containment. Biological hazard? She's a woman with amnesia, not a disease. Dr. Brennan, Agent Parker's voice became stern. Your patient is not who or what she appears to be. The tests you've been running, the anomalies you've discovered, they're just the beginning. This woman is connected to events that threaten national security, and she needs to be in a secure facility where specialists can determine the full extent of the situation. I realized that whatever was happening here was far beyond my understanding or authority. But as a physician, my primary obligation was to my patient's welfare. I want to speak with her first, I said. I want to explain what's happening and make sure she understands. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Dr. Stevens replied. She's already been sedated for transport. I rushed to Serafina's room, but she was already unconscious, connected to a portable IV system, and surrounded by federal agents preparing her for transport. Catherine stood nearby, looking helpless and angry. They wouldn't let us stop them, she said quietly. They had legal documents, federal authority. There was nothing we could do. As I watched them wheel Serafina out of our emergency department, I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. The silver locket that had never left her neck, the one that was supposedly made of unknown metals and formed as a single piece, was no longer around her throat. Catherine, I said urgently, where's her necklace? What necklace? Alex, she wasn't wearing any jewelry when they brought her in. I stared at her in disbelief. The silver locket, she's worn it every day since she arrived. It was there this morning during rounds. Catherine's expression became confused. Alex, I've been her primary nurse for 5 days. She's never worn any jewelry. Are you feeling all right? I looked around the room desperately, trying to find some trace of the locket I clearly remembered examining multiple times, but there was no evidence it had ever existed. According to everyone else on our medical staff, Serafina had arrived with no jewelry whatsoever. As the federal vehicles disappeared into the Vermont winter night, I realized that my encounter with the woman who didn't exist had left me questioning not just medical science and government authority, but my own memories and perceptions of reality. What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a mystery that would ultimately force me to question everything I thought I knew about our world, our history, and the nature of human existence itself. 3 weeks after Serafina vanished with the federal agents, I couldn't stop thinking about her case. The missing locket that everyone claimed never existed haunted me. I started my own investigation, using my medical connections to trace what had happened to her. What I discovered terrified me more than any medical emergency I'd ever faced. Through careful phone calls to colleagues across New England, I uncovered a disturbing pattern. Over the past 50 years, dozens of women matching Serafina's description had appeared at hospitals during severe weather events. All had the same unusual eye color, the same mysterious biology, the same lack of records. Dr. Margaret Chen from Yale New Haven had kept detailed notes on a similar case from 1987. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, she told me, but when I compared her photos to a case from 1962 that I found in our archives, they were identical. Same face, same age, same everything. It was like she hadn't aged at all. My investigation led me to Dr. Harrison Webb, a retired government scientist who had worked on classified projects for 40 years. When I mentioned Serafina's case, his face went pale. "Son," he said quietly, "you've stumbled onto something that was supposed to remain buried forever. Those women aren't from our time. They're refugees from a parallel dimension that's been slowly colliding with ours since the 1940s. The government has been tracking and containing them for decades." He explained that Serafina and others like her were survivors from a world where human evolution had taken a different path. "Their dimension is dying," he said. "The barriers between our worlds are breaking down, and they're falling through into our reality. But they can't survive here long term. Their biology is too different." Dr. Webb showed me classified documents that revealed the horrible truth. The federal facilities weren't helping these women. They were studying them, experimenting on them, trying to understand their unique biology before their bodies inevitably broke down in our world. "Every one of them dies within 6 months of arrival," he said sadly. "Their cellular structure can't adapt to our dimension's physical laws. The government tells the public they're protecting national security, but really, they're just watching these refugees slowly fade away." That's when I realized I couldn't continue practicing medicine in a world where our government was imprisoning and experimenting on interdimensional refugees who were only seeking help. Serafina wasn't a threat. She was a victim, a woman from a dying world who had fallen into ours by accident. I submitted my resignation the next day. How could I take an oath to do no harm, while knowing that somewhere, in a secret facility, a woman I had cared for was dying alone, far from home, in a world that saw her as a specimen, rather than a person? Some mysteries are too terrible to solve. Some truths are too heavy to bear. Serafina taught me that sometimes, the most human thing we can do is simply care for those who are lost regardless of which world they come from.